The sun was bleeding into the horizon when Obadiah Vale saw the horse stop in front of the wooden cross. The dry wind moved through the prairie grass like a whisper, but Psalm stood perfectly still, his chest rising slowly, his ears forward, his eyes locked on the weather-worn symbol half buried in the field. Obadiah leaned against the fence post with one hand trembling around a chipped coffee mug, the other gripping the rail as if the earth might shift beneath him. The cross hadn't been touched in years. Not since the burial. Not since Seraphine. It had been 10 years since Obadiah had dug that grave with his own hands, right there on the northern edge of the pasture. That was where she asked to be buried. Under the sky, where the horses roamed and the wildflowers she loved bloomed in early spring. Psalm had been her favorite, a flame-colored gelding with a silent soul and an almost human gaze. After she died, the horse changed. He stopped running. He stopped eating from anyone's hand but Obadiah's. But every evening, at the same hour, Psalm would walk slowly to that same spot. Until now, he'd only stood. But tonight, he bowed his head. It wasn't a nod. It was deliberate. Reverent. Psalm bent one knee, dipped his head low toward the cross, and stood frozen like a statue carved out of grief. Obadiah's chest tightened, and for the first time in years, he whispered her name aloud. Seraphine. It left his lips like a prayer or a curse, he wasn't sure which. He hadn't spoken it in a long time, not even to himself. He didn't believe in signs, not since the day he lost her. But there it was. The wind shifted. A distant bell rang from the chapel 3 miles down the road. 6 o'clock. Reverend Hollow always rang it by hand. Always. Obadiah hadn't set foot in that chapel since the funeral. He still wore the same boots from that day, soles nearly worn through. Psalm raised his head now, turning slightly to look in Obadiah's direction. That look, it pierced deeper than any sermon ever had. There was something ancient in the animal's eyes, something knowing. And then Psalm began to move, slowly, with intention. Not back toward the barn, but further into the field, past the cross, past the gravesite. Toward something else. Something buried long before Seraphine's body was ever laid to rest. Obadiah's breath caught in his throat. He had a feeling. This night wasn't just memory. It was prophecy. Obadiah didn't follow Psalm right away. He stood by the fence post, heart echoing in his chest like a drum muffled by dust. The horse moved with eerie precision, as if retracing steps no living creature should remember. Past the cross. Past the stones half sunk in the soil. The twilight had thickened, and the prairie sky dimmed to a dull blue-gray, cracked by the last bleeding strands of light. Obadiah finally stepped forward, slow and stiff, the dry ground crunching beneath his boots like old bones. Every step stirred something in the air. Memories, maybe. Or guilt. Obadiah had walked this pasture 1,000 times, but never like this. He followed Psalm's trail, and as he moved, the wind dropped and the silence became absolute. Not even the crickets spoke. He caught himself glancing at the cross again. Its crooked shape had always reminded him of the scar on Seraphine's wrist, faint but permanent. She never told him how she got it. He never asked. Some silences felt safer. Psalm stopped, his hooves planted firmly beside a small, sunken patch of earth, covered in dry grass and weathered sage. The spot was nothing special, just an indentation, maybe from time or rot or a memory forgotten too long. But Psalm lowered his head again, touching his muzzle to the ground. Obadiah's mouth went dry. That place hadn't meant anything to him for years. At least, that's what he told himself. But now, staring at it, a fragment stirred loose, something he had buried deeper than any coffin. He crouched slowly, knees creaking, and ran his calloused hand across the earth. It was soft here, looser than the rest. "This don't make no sense," he murmured, almost to himself, almost to Seraphine. His voice cracked like an old gate. The horse didn't move, didn't blink. Obadiah pressed his fingers into the soil, feeling a strange warmth beneath it, like the ground had been waiting. Suddenly, the sound of a screen door slamming broke the spell. Obadiah turned sharply toward the house. The porch light was on. He hadn't turned it on. No one had lived there but him, not for years. His stomach dropped. Then he saw the shadow in the doorway. Small, still, watching. Obadiah's legs locked beneath him as he stared at the silhouette in the doorway. The porch light flickered once, then steadied. Psalm let out a breath through his nose, but didn't move. The shape was still. It didn't wave, didn't call out, didn't step forward. It simply watched. Obadiah stood slowly, brushing the dirt from his hands with a sharp slap against his jeans, eyes narrowed under the brim of his sweat-stained hat. He squinted into the growing dark. Was it real? A trick of the light? A ghost? The last time someone had stood in that doorway at sunset, it had been Seraphine. She was holding a glass of sweet tea, smiling faintly, as Psalm grazed in the distance. That was the day before the fall, before the silence that had swallowed the whole house whole. But now, the figure was too small to be her. Slim shoulders. A long shadow, not old and bent like his. Not young like a child. A woman. Obadiah felt something twist in his gut. A name hovered behind his teeth, but he was afraid to say it. He took a step forward. "Who's there?" he called out, voice brittle. The words seemed to shatter against the open space. The figure turned, just a little, then stepped back into the house, vanishing without a sound. The porch light flickered again and went out. Obadiah's heart kicked harder now, a mix of fear and something worse, recognition. He started walking. Not fast, his body wouldn't allow it, but with the determination of a man who'd buried too much to be surprised by one more ghost. Psalm remained behind, watching. As Obadiah neared the porch, he noticed something odd. The screen door had been freshly oiled. It didn't squeal like it had for the past decade. It eased open with barely a sound. That small detail nearly brought him to his knees. Someone had been here. Someone who remembered. His hand trembled as he reached for the knob. Inside, the living room was dim but clean. No dust on the mantel. No cobwebs on the corners. A folded blanket rested neatly on the couch, and on the coffee table, beside a glass of water, was something that made the room tilt beneath him. A photograph. Face down, with a yellow post-it stuck to the back. In neat, careful handwriting. "We need to talk. L." Obadiah stood frozen, the yellow note trembling between his fingers. He hadn't seen Leora in 12 years, not since the argument that hollowed the house out like a dried gourd. Her handwriting hadn't changed. It was still careful, slanted slightly to the right, like she always thought too far ahead before speaking. He turned the photo over, half expecting to see Seraphine's face smiling up at him. But it was older. It was all three of them. Taken on a Sunday after church, back when smiles were easy and Psalm was still a foal nosing at Leora's shoulder. He sank into the armchair as if pulled by gravity. The silence pressed in again, but this time it felt different. Tense. Waiting. Something stirred upstairs, floorboards creaking softly. His throat tightened. Leora was here. She was upstairs. She had come back without a phone call, without a warning, without knocking. Just like she had left. But why now? Why after all these years of empty mailboxes and returned letters? Before he could gather himself, he heard soft footsteps on the stairs. Then she appeared, older, yes, but unmistakably Leora. Her hair was tied back, her face drawn but calm, the same storm hiding behind her eyes. Obadiah stood slowly, every joint protesting. He met her gaze, and for a second, neither of them breathed. The years between them stretched like barbed wire. Neither one knew how to cross it. "I didn't know if you'd still be here," she said quietly, voice thin as smoke. Her eyes scanned the room like it might disappear at any moment. But Psalm, he remembered. Obadiah tried to speak, but his voice cracked. He hadn't said her name aloud in years. Not once. "Why now?" he managed to ask, the words scraping his throat. "Why today?" Leora hesitated. Her eyes flicked to the window, out toward the pasture, toward the cross. "Because the dreams came back," she said. "And because something inside me said if I waited any longer, there'd be nothing left of you to come back to." She stepped closer, but didn't sit. "And I found something, Daddy. In Mama's things. Something you never told me about." Obadiah's breath caught. There it was, the crack in the dam. The living room smelled of cedar and dust, two scents Leora remembered too well. But the silence between her and Obadiah was unfamiliar now. Not cold, just emptied, like everything that once filled it had dried up. She finally sat down, her fingers loosely gripping the edges of her knees. She watched her father, this man who had once seemed taller than the sky itself, now leaning slightly to the right, like the years had pulled him down unevenly. "I went through her hope chest," she said, voice low. "Last month. I shouldn't have, but something told me to." Obadiah didn't respond. He stared at the photograph in his lap like it might answer for him. His hands had stopped trembling, but his jaw was tight. Leora continued. "There was a letter addressed to you. Never opened. Never sent. She wrote it the night before she fell." Obadiah's eyes flicked up sharply. That word, fell, hung in the air like gunpowder. "She didn't fall," he said finally, his voice rough and raw. "She jumped." The room went still. Even the wind outside seemed to pause. Leora blinked. "You knew?" He nodded, but didn't look at her. "She came to me that night. She was shaking. Told me something I wasn't ready to hear. Something I never wanted you to know." He looked toward the window, toward the spot where Psalm still stood near the cross. "And I told her to wait. That we'd talk in the morning. That we'd pray about it." Leora leaned forward. "What did she say?" Obadiah finally looked her in the eyes. "That I wasn't your real father." The silence after that wasn't heavy. It was hollow. It sucked the warmth from the room. Leora sat back, hands falling limply to her sides. She didn't cry. Not yet. She only stared at the man she thought she'd known. And in her silence, Obadiah saw Seraphine's face, haunted, trembling, pleading, forgiveness he hadn't known how to give. And then, from outside, Psalm neighed once, sharp, urgent. Both of them turned. The cross was gone from view. Obadiah was already on his feet by the time Leora reached the door. Neither spoke as they stepped out into the cooling air, the porch boards creaking beneath their weight. The sky had darkened into a purple bruise, and the wind carried the distant smell of rain. Out in the pasture, Psalm stood near the cross again, but beside him, where the ground had sagged earlier, was something neither of them could explain. The earth had shifted, sunken further, as if something beneath had finally given way. Psalm pawed at the dirt, agitated but cautious. Obadiah stepped off the porch, slow and deliberate. Leora followed, the silence between them thick but no longer hostile, just raw. The closer they got, the more the air seemed to hum with something ancient. Not supernatural. Just old. Human. Heavy. Obadiah stopped a few feet from the sunken patch. The soil was cracked open in a jagged oval, maybe 3 feet long. Not natural. Not weather. It was as if the land itself had decided it was time. He looked at Leora. "Get me a shovel," he said, voice gravel-thick. She didn't argue. A minute later she returned, eyes wide, lips pressed tight. He began digging. The dirt gave way too easily. After only a few shovelfuls, Obadiah hit wood, old, rotted, the kind you didn't find in fence posts or sheds. He paused, breath heaving, sweat beading on his brow despite the evening chill. Leora knelt beside him now. "What is this?" she whispered. "I don't know," he lied. But he did. He remembered nailing it shut. He remembered Seraphine's shaking hands, the way she begged him not to call the police. The way she whispered, "It was an accident. Please, Obadiah, please." And how he, God help him, had said nothing, had buried the box and the truth and part of himself right here in this earth. The lid gave way with a final groan, and the smell hit them first, earth, mold, and something older. Inside was a bundle wrapped in a floral bedsheet. Leora's hands flew to her mouth. Obadiah stared, hollowed out. He recognized the sheet. It was Seraphine's favorite. Psalm backed away slowly, head low. Leora's voice was barely a breath. "Is that a child?" Obadiah couldn't answer, because in his heart he already knew the answer. And Psalm, now still as stone, lowered his head once more toward the ground, as if mourning not for what was lost, but for what had been hidden. Obadiah didn't speak for a long time. The shovel lay beside him, forgotten, half buried in the dirt. Leora sat with her arms wrapped around her knees, her eyes locked on the ground as if daring it to offer her a different answer. Psalm paced nearby, slow and deliberate, circling the exposed box like he was guarding a sacred place. No one touched the bundle. Neither dared. The wind picked up. The sky, once bruised, had turned almost black. Thunder echoed somewhere far off. Leora finally spoke, and her voice was sharper than any storm. "Tell me who it was." Obadiah didn't flinch. He looked older than he had an hour ago, eyes sunken, skin gray. "Her name was Unia," he said. "Your mother's sister." Leora blinked, confused. "What are you talking about?" "She was younger, fragile, lived with us for a while after her breakdown. That summer you turned 5. Seraphine begged me not to tell you she was your aunt. She said you were too young to understand the things Unia had been through. But she got better, or we thought she had. Then one night," Obadiah swallowed hard, "Psalm found her. Out here. With the baby." Leora's hands shook. "There was a baby?" Obadiah nodded slowly. Seraphine thought it was better if the world never knew. She blamed herself. Said if she'd watched Unia closer, it wouldn't have happened. The baby never drew breath. But it was there. Real. I told her we had to call someone. But Seraphine, she was terrified. Of what people would say. Of losing you. Leora stood now, her voice rising. "So you buried a child. In the middle of the pasture. Like a secret. And never told me?" Obadiah finally met her eyes. "We buried the shame. We didn't know what else to do." For the first time, Leora's face cracked. Not in rage, but in heartbreak. She looked at Psalm, who had stopped moving and now stood perfectly still beside the open earth. She stepped closer to the bundle, tears running freely. "Her name should be spoken," she whispered, "even if she never breathed." Obadiah lowered his head. Her name was Mercy. And for a moment, the wind died completely. The rain began softly, like it was unsure of its own permission. Gentle drops tapped against Leora's shoulders and clung to her hair, but she didn't move. She stood by the opened box, eyes closed, hands trembling. Obadiah didn't try to stop her. He couldn't. He watched his daughter with a helplessness he'd never admitted, not even to himself. She looked like Seraphine now. Not in the way she carried her face, but in how she carried the grief. "She was my cousin," Leora finally whispered, barely audible over the sound of the rain. "And you both made her disappear." Obadiah nodded once. Slowly. "We thought we were protecting you. But truth is, we were protecting ourselves." His voice cracked at the end. Not from emotion, but exhaustion. A kind of spiritual collapse. "We were so afraid of what people would think, what they'd say about Unia, about us. About your mother. She couldn't take one more scandal. She was already drowning in the first." Leora turned toward him, her eyes red but sharp. "And what about what I would have thought? You didn't give me the chance." She wasn't yelling. Her tone was calm now. Wounded, yes, but steady. "I spent years thinking the silence in this house was because of me. That I'd done something wrong." Obadiah took a slow step forward. Then another. The rain had soaked through his flannel, but he didn't notice. "You didn't do anything wrong, Leora. We did. And we kept doing it, even after she was gone. Even after your mother jumped." He could barely say the word. "She never forgave herself for convincing me to bury that box. I think it ate her alive from the inside out." Leora looked at Psalm, who had not moved from his post beside the grave. His chest rose and fell with deep, steady breaths, as if keeping vigil. She reached out and ran a hand along his neck. "He knew," she said. "All this time. He knew exactly where she was." Obadiah looked down. Animals carry memory different. Not in their heads. In their bones. They stood there together, 2 generations stitched together by silence and soaked by the same rain, looking down at a life never lived, but never fully lost. By morning, the rain had washed away the hard edges of the night. The pasture looked softer, the earth darker, as if the land had exhaled. Psalm was lying near the cross now, legs folded beneath him, calm and unmoving like a monument. Inside the house, Leora wandered through the rooms she hadn't seen in over a decade. Dust no longer coated the shelves, but the air still held that same weight, like breath held too long. In the living room, she stood before the fireplace where Seraphine used to kneel and light candles during thunderstorms. Something drew her eye, not the mantel, but the hearth itself. The ashes had been swept out, but tucked into a narrow crack behind the brickwork was the corner of an envelope. She knelt, heart pounding, and pulled it free. Her name was on the front, written in that same, slanted handwriting. It was from Seraphine. She didn't open it right away. Instead, she called for Obadiah, who came down the stairs slower than usual. His eyes were swollen from sleep, or maybe from everything else. She handed him the letter. "She left this for me," she said softly. "And she hid it here." Obadiah's hands trembled as he turned the envelope over. "Your mother never stopped writing. Even when she stopped talking. Letters to you, to God, to Unia, to herself. She believed words could keep something alive, even after everything else died." Leora opened the letter and read in silence. The words weren't long. Just a page. A confession and a goodbye. A mother asking forgiveness not for what she had done, but for what she couldn't undo. At the bottom was a single line that made Leora's breath catch. "Forgive him. He buried the box, but he never buried his love for you." She folded the letter, eyes full. When she looked at Obadiah, something had shifted. Not erased. Not forgotten. But softened. They walked together to the edge of the pasture later that morning, where Mercy's resting place had been gently covered again. This time, not as a secret, but as a memorial. Leora had placed a single wildflower on top. Psalm stood nearby, silent, watching. Obadiah finally broke the silence. "You don't have to stay." Leora looked out across the field. "I know. But maybe I want to." The sun was just beginning to rise over the ridge when Obadiah hammered the new cross into the soil. This one was made of cedar, freshly carved, the wood still raw and fragrant. Leora watched from a few feet away, her arms wrapped around herself in the cool morning breeze. The old cross, the one that had marked Seraphine's grave, now rested beside it, its base cracked from years of weather and weight. But it wouldn't be discarded. It would be moved, to stand next to Mercy's resting place. Both names, finally remembered. Psalm stood nearby, his head lowered in that familiar posture of reverence. The horse had barely left the gravesite since the night it was uncovered. Leora had brushed him earlier, speaking to him as if he were a person, thanking him for remembering what everyone else had tried to forget. Psalm responded the only way he ever did, with presence. Quiet. Stillness. Loyalty carved into bone. Inside the house, Obadiah had started clearing drawers. Not to erase the past, but to make space. Space for new things. For Leora's suitcase. For the sound of footsteps in the hallway again. He didn't ask her to stay. She didn't ask if she should. Some things don't need speaking when silence has already spoken everything. Later that day, Reverend Ezra Hollow came to visit. He stood by the fence, hat in hand, eyes misty as he looked over the pasture. Always said this land had memory, he murmured. Just needed someone brave enough to listen. He didn't stay long. Just enough to leave a small wooden marker with the word Mercy burned into it. As dusk fell, Leora sat on the porch, her mother's letter folded in her lap. Obadiah sat beside her, sipping from a mug neither of them had washed in years. The silence between them no longer felt hollow. It felt lived in, shared. Psalm wandered the fence line in the distance, stopping occasionally to glance toward the house, or maybe just toward them. Before going in for the night, Obadiah turned to Leora and said quietly, "I reckon she'd be proud of you." Leora didn't answer right away. Then she looked up at the darkening sky and said, "I hope she knows we remember." And out in the pasture, under a sky full of fading light, the two crosses stood, weathered and new, side by side. Not as monuments to secrets, but as promises that nothing stays buried forever.